Now, the #1 story of the week, the Office of Personnel Management's warning federal employees about trying to get to work this week. OPM Director Michael Regas writes to agencies that agencies should let employees work remotely whenever possible. Traci DiMartini is Chief Human Capital Officer at the General Services Administration. Traci, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. I guess the silver lining in a memo like this is you and your colleagues at GSA have been doing remote work for a long time. What have you learned in the time that you've been there, and what have your colleagues learned about remote work since the pandemic began?
Good morning, Francis. Yes, GSA, this is normal way of business for us now. We have mastered telework and remote work. So have many of my colleagues across the government and other agencies. We are in full telework posture. We have a wonderful emergency management team also at GSA, and we are asking all of our employees to stay home next week and to continue their good work providing business and services to the federal workforce and the federal government, and we plan on not missing a beat, which has been what we've been doing the last 10 months.
What are you thinking about at GSA, and what's your sense about what your colleagues in the human capital community across government are thinking about once we get to a point, whenever that may be, that it's safe for people to come back to the office? People want to come back to the office to whatever degree they want. I guess maybe that's the question. What's your sense of whether people want to come back and how much they want to come back when it's safe to do so, Traci?
Look, certainly some people are dying to come back into the office. They prefer to be with their colleagues, to have that office culture reignited, to be at their workstations. And some people are enjoying working from home. At GSA, we are looking at this as an opportunity. How can we really rejuvenate, reinvent, and reshape federal work, particularly in the DC area, but also in our 11 regions across the country? We've realized during this past year that we are masters at telework. Our productivity has gone up. We are still providing outstanding services. We have a wonderful cadre of building managers that are still keeping federal space secure and operating during the pandemic. But we are also looking at ways to be creative, because if we take this opportunity to figure out how we can have people continue to work at home beyond COVID and when the pandemic ends, we're going to open up a whole new world of how we recruit people and what compensation levels might look like as we broaden our scope across the country. And also maybe break down some silos so we have people working across regions and with central office. GSA is going to pilot what we're calling a return to facilities program. We've been working very hard on it. And we're going to see how we can operationalize and allow people to choose where they work, along with input from their supervisors and management, because the ultimate goal is to do what's in the best interest of the agency while we're also saving money and continuing to deliver high-valued services and increase our efficiency.
Since, I guess, May or June, when it became obvious we were going to be doing this for a while, anytime I would have one of your colleagues on the program or talk to somebody off the air, I would always ask about onboarding, what that process is like. You have some unique insight into what it's like to onboard during this process, being that you came to GSA in September from the Peace Corps. What was that process like for you, and what did you learn about that you could share with your colleagues across the human capital community, Traci?
First and foremost, that it can be done. And I had a wonderful onboarding experience. It helps that GSA has a rock star CIO office. We have state-of-the-art technology, and we embrace the latest. We use a Google platform. So my onboarding experience was phenomenal. My equipment came right to my home. I was able to log on. I had help desk support that allowed me to figure out how to get into the GSA systems, and then I was off to the races. We're going to see the same thing happen next week. We are going to onboard all of our incoming political employees virtually, because we understand that during this time of COVID, safety of our workforce is the first thing we are focused on, and we've demonstrated that we can do it. Since March 1st of 2020 through December 30th, we onboarded 841 people virtually. And that's not just in DC, but that's across the country. So we know how to do it, and we're going to continue to do so during this time of the pandemic.
You mentioned what you're advising your employees to do this week. I have a quote from Michael Regas's memo to agency leaders this week. We're going to put that up on the screen here in a moment. To help alleviate traffic congestion, minimize distraction to law enforcement and security officials, the Office of Personnel Management is urging agencies to permit employees who might otherwise report to the normal agency worksite during this period to use all available workplace flexibility options. Again, this is something that you've been doing for a long time. To your agency colleagues who maybe haven't had as much success at telework as you have, what would you advise them to do to triage over the weekend and at the beginning of the week to make sure they're ready for midweek?
Communicate, communicate, communicate. You cannot over communicate to your workforce on what the expectations are and make sure that they have the connections and equipment and expectations set for them up front. Look, coming into town is not going to answer the issue about productivity. I had to go downtown this week. I wanted to say farewell to my bosses, Emily Murphy and Allison Brigatti, and I sat in the East Street Tunnel for 2 hours on Wednesday as they were doing the first phase of closure. That was not a good use of anyone's time. So I went back to telework yesterday and actually worked longer hours, which many people tend to do when they're teleworking. There really is no excuse at this point for any agency to be afraid of telework or for not investing in the programs, the training, and the communication that's needed. This is where we are. This is what we've been doing. We know how to do it. And if agencies are worried or have issues, they should reach out to those of us that have pretty much mastered it at this point.
Traci DiMartini, thanks very much for coming on. Great to have you back.
Thank you, Francis.